Okay, thank you, Colonel. I'm going to grab hold and throw up a PowerPoint and get started here. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Let's see. I too am. I've been using WebEx and Zoom, so this is my first big setup with Google Meet. Hopefully, it all works out okay. Apologize for any stumbling around. So let me get my first slides going here. Scanner Fam Prep. Okay, can everybody see that screen? Scanner Fam Mission Fam Prep course.
Sir.
And actually, what I'll do is, Colonel 30 Acre, if you find any problems, or Mike, Lieutenant Cinedino, if you see anything that's not making sense, let me know rather than everybody chiming in. What I have in front of me, just for your own information, is I can't see any of you when I share this in the size that we need to see it. I'm going to back it down and see if that works for everybody in terms of size. Stand by one.
Yeah, that is one of the problems I found with this system, is that is an issue.
So I can hear you all. I'm going to, for the sake of bandwidth, and since I don't need to be seen, I'm going to turn my camera off, and I'm leaving my mic on, and I'm going to go with a full screen here so you can see my slides, and I'm just going to get to rolling, and we'll talk about how the course is going to go. And so much for turning my mic off. I got all kinds of things in my way here. Turn camera off. There we go. All right. And where'd my presentation go? All right, Colonel 30 Acre, is the presentation up now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, here we go. All right, for the second time, this is going to be CAP Mission Scanner Fam Prep course. Make sure you sign in with your CAP ID on the chat screen. Emails also, I know you put them in the spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet was a general sign up. And if you look at what folks were signing up for, it's kind of hard to pick out exactly who was going to be at the scanner course. So we could use a new email list and your CAP IDs, okay? So our objective is to provide the FAM prep training for the CAP Aircrew Mission Scanner qualification. Our goal after we're done with this is that you as MS trainees will be able to demonstrate understanding of and pass the evaluation on all MS Squid or FAM prep section tasks. And those are seen on your specialty qualification training sheet in this area here. And we're going to try and get through hopefully all of this. Actually, our goal is to get through all of this by the end of the course. The course is directed by Major Andy Loy. First Lieutenant Mike Cinedino and myself are instructing today. My name is Steve Gugala. And our time frame is June 24th, that's today. July 1st and July 8th are going to be instruction. And on July 15th, we're going to have a online test evaluation that Major Loy is going to administer, and it'll be for the entire time. There'll be a little bit of review in there if necessary, or questions, I should say. Everything's going to run from 1900 to 2130. So the eval, unlike the ground, I didn't sit in on any of the ground stuff, but I understand they were running quizzes and things. There's a couple of handout quizzes that I'll be emailing to you on some of the content that aren't necessarily in our task requirements, but they are in the training requirements. And so I'm going to send you out some online survey stuff to get you ready for that information, because it's going to benefit you throughout your whole CAP career. The materials you're going to need, if you haven't already gotten them, and Major Loy sent out an email about this, you're going to need to get a Mission Aircrew reference text for Mission Scanner. You're going to need to get a hold of the Mission Aircrew test guide for Mission Scanner. And you're going to need to locate and find your specialty qualification training tracking information, whether that be on e-services or with a hard copy, to keep track of your progress towards the qualification. Now, where do you find all of this stuff? Easiest thing to do for the online or for the study materials is to download them via the nisacap.gov website. And you can see that up in the upper left-hand corner, the domain address. Easy way to do that is just to Google NESA, November Echo Sierra Alpha.cap.gov, and you'll get the NISA main page, and you can navigate through it until you find this, the scanner and photographer information page. Over on the right, we've got PDF files for the Mission Scanner Task Guide, the Mission Scanner text, and I didn't put it in the first slide, but it would be a good idea to also download the Mission Scanner slides. This is kind of like a Cliff Notes cheat sheet for you. It is the bulk of the presentations. We're doing kind of a mix and match. We've written some new stuff and we're using some of the old stuff, but this is going to be something that's good for you to have in your training material. So take the opportunity to get all of this information into your pockets so that you can study and move along with us. As far as the Squitter goes, SQTRs, you're going to go into your e-services page, which I hope all of you are familiar with by now since you're past level 1 and CAP members. And on the e-services page, you go to the main menu and you're going to get a drop down that's going to give you operations. Under OpQuals, it's going to take you to this page, and here you're going to find SQTR entry worksheet, which is going to be your online in e-services, or you can print a blank worksheet that is exactly what I showed you in the first slide there, so that you have a hard copy that you can take to missions to track what you've done. Hold it without having to open up a computer to find out where your progress is. The expectations of this class, from the instructors, you can expect us to be prepared. You can expect us to have knowledge. And if we do not have the answers to the questions you may have, we're certainly going to find them out and maybe have to give them to you offline. And finally, we're going to respect your time. I know, especially during this lockdown, everybody's been doing a lot of online stuff, and your time is important. It's precious to you. It's precious to us, and we're going to do our best not to waste it. My expectations, our expectations as instructors of you as the trainees, take that material that I just presented to you and read it. Learn it, understand it, so that you are overly prepared for each lesson and ready to participate where the opportunity provides. And so we are not pouring information into your heads, we're supplementing what you've already picked up. And your third responsibility is to come up with your questions. Make sure you get them asked and answered during this time frame. This is a great opportunity. You're not in the heat of a SAREX or maybe a busy squadron meeting trying to get stuff done. We are here and available to answer your questions. I prepared this slide with WebEx in mind, but we'll be handling questions to a degree during the training. You can type them in the chat, and everything goes to everyone in the Google Meet chat. So if you don't have a problem with everybody seeing your question, blast it up there. Keep in mind that maybe somebody's going to have the same question. Can't raise your hand in Google Meet, so we're just going to have to stick with the chat. Myself or Lieutenant Cittadino are going to work on the sidelines. Whoever's presenting, the counterpart's going to be monitoring the chat, possibly answering your questions right there rather than putting them out. And then at the end of each session, we'll try and compile some of the bigger questions and get them answered as a group. There will be an opportunity for open forum questions during each session. And I didn't make a slide for it, but we'll give you some contact information so that you can talk to us offline. And finally, for this part of it, this is going to be our wish list for training for these next 4 sessions. Today, we're going to cover It's a 60 review, but it's basically rules and regs for aircrew and ES services, scanner duties and cap missions, aircraft familiarization, and survival and urgent care. Day 2, day 3. I mean, you can read these on your own. I'm not gonna read them out here, but this is our light schedule for the course. So that's my first opportunity to see if there are any big questions looming right now. Let me go to the chat. Okay, we got everybody logged in. Make sure. Sign off. Find the email list. Tell you what, we'll go through these. You can use RH for raised hand. RH for raised hand. Kristen Moritz, I apologize with the last name. You can use RH to raise hand. Okay, that would be, I assume, typing it in the chat. What we've got to present is going to be Fire Hose 101. We're going to turn on the spigot and just get going. So there's going to be a lot of information thrown at you. We'll do our best to corral it all and make sure you're properly trained and ready for your duty assignments. All right, I'm going to get up my next presentation here. Okay, this is the boring part. It's going to be rules and regs. Mike's got the exciting stuff. He's going to talk about airplanes and all that. We're going to get through rules and regs right off the get-go. Again, I apologize. I don't want to waste your time. I'm going to get this up as fast as I can get it moving. Fingers crossed.
And a couple of people just asked, I just posted that link to all the documents in the chat.
Now, men, there are a few things we ought to get straightened out right at the start to avoid any grief later on. Now, here at the Rock, we have 2 basic rules. Memorize them so that you can say them in your sleep. The first rule is obey all rules. Secondly, do not write on the walls, as it takes a lot of work to erase writing off of walls.
I am desperately trying to avoid putting you folks through death by PowerPoint. So we'll let Barney Fife get us started here. And Colonel, that video came through, right?
Yeah, it did. Just volume was a little low, but video was fine.
Low? Okay, very good. All right, here we go. Our objective. We're going to give you an overview of the regulations specific to CAP aircrew and ES operations. This is not intended to drill down deep into these. It's to make you aware of the operating rules that we run under. And these are very important. At the end of this lesson, you'll be able to understand that we do run both our air and emergency services operations by several regulations. You'll be able to locate these regs for your own study and reference. And you'll be able to demonstrate the ability to find and reference regs to answer protocol and operational questions. Why do we have all of these regulations? You know, as a society, we're no different than life on the street. We've got a lot of things going on, and we need to regulate and govern our activities for safety, to keep ourselves organized, to maintain organizational and unit cohesion, and to protect the assets and the property that we're not only entrusted to us, but that we may be working with or around. As I mentioned, we're going to do a broad outline of this section. And there are 7 main regulations that you're going to want to be aware of and have familiarity with as an emergency service operator. CAP 70-1, 60-3, 900-5, 60-5, 62-1, and 62-2. I'm going to go through an overview of each one of these one at a time. So get your pillows out, but pay attention. Locating the regs, you're going to go to civilairpatrol.com, the publications library tab under members.
Sorry to interrupt. Are you supposed to be showing something on your screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, nobody's seeing it.
I'm sorry. Let me stop. I'll kill it and try again. So basically, you were listening to me talk to a gray screen.
Basically.
Excellent. Got it. Okay, let's try it again. I think this is the one we're looking for. Probably didn't hit share. How about that one?
There it is.
Now? Okay. Did you get to see this? All right. 70-1, 60-3, 900-5, 60-5, 62-1, and 62-2. No, I do not have them memorized. Still seeing the screen? Okay. I was talking about how to get to the regulations and where to find them. You don't have to carry binders of regulations around with you. Go to civilairpatrol.com under the members tab, publication library, index and regulations. And this is what the page title is going to look like. And these are how they're listed. They're typically hyperlinks. If it's discontinued, it's probably not going to be a hyperlink. 70-1 I highlighted here because that is going to be the regulation that you hear and see the most of as an aircrew member. But you'll also see that there's 60-5, 60-6. They can be downloaded and printed or downloaded and stored. Unfortunately, not every reg that we're going to go through is listed here. I've learned, unfortunately, you'll find 62-2 and 62-1 specifically can be found with a Google search. I believe they are under rewrite, and so they have a different track to get a hold of them because they're running under supplements, but you can still find them. This is an example of what one looks like, 70-1 particularly, when you download it and pull it up. And while we're at it, let's just launch right into 70-1. 70-1, as I mentioned, is the Bible for flight management. It's the general rules for all flight operations. But it's not just for pilots. And I don't exactly know what the background of everybody in the room is. So we're going to treat this as if we're all just getting started out. We don't have any pilots in the room. We don't have any old salts. It's the regulation governing all flight ops, whether that be personal proficiency, O flights, or in our case, ES missions. If a CAP plane flies, it's operating under 70-1. All aircrew are responsible for understanding and knowing the regulations in 70-1 that are pertinent to their operations. When you get into it, you're going to find that there's a lot of stuff in there that aren't emergency services because you're talking about O-flight pilots or getting your quals in general, but there's enough of the general ops that all aircrew need to know what's going on in here. So they are the basic rules for operating a CAP aircraft. They talk about operating limitations such as crew duty periods or authorized airfields where we can take our airplanes. Crew duty periods, I'm going to mention again because that's something you're going to end up needing to know about. Aircraft requirements for non-CAP aircraft. Here in Illinois, we don't use personal aircraft for our CAP missions. I can't speak for other units in the nation, but it's not as much an issue here, but CAP does have a regulation to allow a personal aircraft to be approved and used for CAP operations. Flight release requirements, passenger requirements, who can get on a CAP aircraft and fly, grounding and mishap reports, and just administrative management items for flying, flight logs, WMERS entries, types of missions, and use of mission symbols. All of this is under 70-1. The thing for you as a scanner to understand is that, irregardless of experience and rank, just because you're a scanner, it does not mean that it is a get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on situation when you're in the aircraft. You are not at the mercy of the pilot or the mission observer. Everyone is responsible for knowing the items in 70-1 for your own protection, for the protection of the crew, and for the overall operation and success of the mission. You are part of the crew. You are not along for the ride. And, a lot of times folks will get the low man on the, or woman on the totem pole syndrome, or stigma where, I don't know anything, I'm new, and that's not the case. You have the time and the ability to make yourself aware of all of these administrative things before you even get into the aircraft, so that you can best support the crew and best support the mission that you're flying by knowing what you can and can't do, how to operate, and keep everybody on the up and up. You respect the experience of the people that you're working with, but be prepared to work as a knowledgeable partner. Read these things, know them. The pilot may need to ask, hey, we're pushing our duty day. Does anybody remember what duty day is? Be a part of the crew. Get in, get your hands in there right away. And knowing your job includes knowing the rules of operation. Next big regulation we're going to get into is CAP 60-3. CAP 60-3 is all about ES operations, training, and the operational missions. (60-3) is in effect whether you're on a real deal disaster, whether you're training, whether you're air or ground crew in an ES capacity, and whether you're mission management. Let's get into some of the specifics of what this is. This is a broad reach regulation. And one of the first things that you'll find in it is it discusses the priority of support. Who do we work for? Under 60-3, you're going to find out that the Air Force is our #1 priority, the needs of the Air Force. And after that, the regulation will spell out how we are able to interact with federal agencies such as FEMA or the DOD, state agencies, in our case, Illinois, or local agencies. Under all of that information, you're going to find unit training and readiness requirements and member personal responsibilities. You're going to find requirements for operational risk management, ORMs, requirements to manage fatigue, funding for emergency services missions, qualifications and performance standards for individuals, and Air Force assigned training procedures. All of these things are outlined. A lot of them are requirements. For example, in the case of ORM, 60-3 requires you to have ORM procedures in place, and there's an entirely different regulation that outlines how to do it. So 60-1 will tell you what you need to do, and you will typically find there's another regulation that'll tell you how to do it. The other thing that you're going to find in there is what you can and can't do on a CAP mission. So some things to think about, let's say you're on an ELT search, either as a ground team or as an air crew, and you land and you know that unit is somewhere in a hangar nearby. You figured out what the hangar is. Can you go inside? Can you walk in and turn that off? 60-3 will tell you what you can and can't do. What if you get injured on a mission? 60-3 will give you remedy for injury on a mission, depending on the mission. So in addition to telling you all of these things for emergency services operations, it also outlines some of the legal basis for our ES services. The important things that you're going to need to know, and this is part of your task training, and you'll be tested on this, is under 60-3, section 1-24, we are eligible for FECA and FTCA coverage under the federal employment programs when we are volunteering under Air Force missions. I'm not going to drill down into this right now. This is going to come under a category in our scanner job duty training, but do know that Federal Employment Compensation Act and Federal Tort Claims Act apply to CAP volunteers who find themselves in a mishap or an injury during certain mission criteria. We also are supported by CAP corporate insurance if we are under CAP missions. That brings us to CAP 900-5. This is the regulation that spells out all of these protections and benefits for a CAP volunteer. So definitely get a hold of that regulation and know what you're getting into. CAP 60-5 is all about critical incident stress management, CISM. Just like a full-time first responder, when a CAP volunteer is on operations, real deal operations, they are subject to the same personal stresses to mind and soul. And so CAP has recognized that, and we have in place a comprehensive integrated multi-component crisis, say that a lot fast, intervention system, which includes access to counselors and a counseling system and our chaplain service. And I know as a CAP member, it's probably the second thing you heard when you walked in the door: safety, safety, safety. 62-1 is our safety responsibilities and procedures regulation. I'm going to take a second here, change my slide. So that I can stop talking. This is kind of cute. It was kind of courtesy of the United States Marine Corps. Wanted to stop my voice for a little while and just take a minute, because we are CAP and everything's about safety. Let's listen to this Marine presentation on safety. Is that coming through okay, Colonel?
Yes, it's coming through.
I'm Mullen here, with Sergeant Major at the Marine Corps Exchange, checking out preparations for the long weekend ahead. Hope you have a nice time this weekend, but we're here to make sure that you've got a good plan for the weekend. Hey, a long weekend's a great opportunity to invite friends over, relax, and have a good time. Make sure that if you choose to drink, you do so responsibly. Always have a designated driver, and never drink while handling open flames. And don't forget to hydrate. The scenic landscape of Southern California provides ample opportunity for outdoor recreation, and you should take advantage of that. No matter the activity, make sure you have a plan. Someone who knows where you are and what you're doing. And don't forget to hydrate. Taking time to enjoy the outdoors is also time to disconnect from technology and connect with friends, family, and nature. Put away the cell phone. Enjoy your surroundings. Given our remote location here at the Combat Center, you may decide to drive to the coast for nice weather and fun in the sun. But before you make that long car trip, make sure you have proper safety gear. Also, make sure you have access to roadside assistance. And remember that being out in the sun means you need to protect your skin, so load up on the sunscreen and don't forget to hydrate. You are a Marine on and off duty. Make good choices when it comes to your health and fitness. You'll be ready to fight when you return. And don't forget to hydrate. All right, Marines. Hope you enjoy your nice long weekend. You certainly earned it. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you when you return. Semper Fidelis.
Just a little break in the action. Even the Marines are worried about safety. And it's an ongoing mantra here at Civil Air Patrol. Bear with me while I pop this back up again. We good to go, sir? Is it up?
Yep, it's good.
Outstanding. No, we don't need to see it again. Still there? Okay. 62-1 establishes the CAPS culture of safety. Spells out each person's responsibilities for safety management, describes the methods for ORM and SMS, which is safety management systems at all levels. And just like anything else, stuff's going to happen. Things are going to get broken. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to get injured. CAPS 62-2 is our procedures for mishap reporting and investigation. Again, both 62-1 and 62-2, you need to Google search and track those down. But 62-2 is will cover injury to person, damage to equipment, deviation from required operating procedures. And that's an interesting one. You know, mishap reporting isn't necessarily involved in breakage. You know, if you have a major deviation from a 60-3 rule, for example, let's say you're out on a mission and your pilot, you know, the weather came up a little faster than they expected. They had a problem with the weather, couldn't get anywhere, and ended up landing in, say, an unapproved field for a CAP aircraft. Usually that's dependent upon its location, whether or not it's a privately owned field. But you landed safely, you ended up in a grass strip somewhere, and you find out that this runway was not on the CAP approved list of places you could go. Well, now you have a mishap. You haven't broken anything, you haven't caused any damage, but you did deviate in a pretty large way from a regulation. And so now you're involved in a mishap reporting situation. So 62-2 is going to guide you through that. Each wing, I'm finding, usually has an approved supplement to 62-2, generally based on their circumstances, their state's operating requirements. And so for us in the Illinois wing, if you go to the Illinois wing website, illinoiswingcap.gov, you will be able to locate our wing mishap reporting supplement. And it will give us the guidance on how to get that done. As a scanner, you know, you're going to want to know what this is all about. Don't necessarily lean on your pilot or your mission observer to walk us through this. You know, a lot of times we're either out of practice or having never had to do something like this. Just know that if something happens, this is where you go to figure it out. So I tried to make it as painless as possible. Again, my intent was not to pour the information into your head for these regulations because they are very deep. There's a lot going on in them. Please take the time. 70-1, 60-3, 900-5, 60-5, 62-1, and 2. Take a look at them on in the CAP website under the library. I will be sending out a online test just to get your minds thinking about situations. And I'd like to have that turned in before you take the test on the final day. Okay. I'm going to remind you that the first rule is obey all the rules. Don't write on the walls, and don't forget to hydrate. Okay. I haven't been able, as I said, when you put up the screen in Google Meet, I can't see what you folks have going on. Not seeing a PPT. Sorry, I'm not seeing a PPT. Okay, that was 20 minutes ago. So I guess did we get that rectified? Don't forget to hydrate. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't really seen any other questions. So.
Okay. What we're going to do Mike is going to be looking at the chat. Colonel 30 Acres looking at the chat. I'm going to give you my last spiel for the day. If there's going to be questions, I'll expect them there. So without further ado, let me get this one spooled up. Okay. Okay, does everybody, Sir Colonel, do you see a scanner duties and cap missions slide?
Yes, I do.
Outstanding. Here we go. Okay, pretty much speaks for itself. Now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of why you're here. Our objective this time around is to provide the MS trainees instruction on various emergency services, missions that cap aircrew support, mission scanner duties and responsibilities, liability coverage and mishap reporting. I mentioned we're going to get into that a little deeper here. Paperwork and administrative procedures for scanners. And at the end, you should be able to list all the various CAP-ES missions, pass an evaluation for mission scanner FAM prep test tasks 2013, 2014, 2015, and P0101. If you remember, it seems like a million slides ago already, the mission scanner task text, the book. This is going to be chapter 1. At the end of this section, did I already go through that? Yeah, you'll be able to pass the tests. You're also going to get some extra things that I know I didn't get when I was doing this training and wish I had to learn at OJT was use of the mission forms, mission logs, how to work around the squitter a little bit, and then to demonstrate how to use e-services to document your mission training. So it seems to me that every CAP online presentation or training event I've been to always has some requirement to tell us about the 3 missions of CAP. Well, we're going to talk about emergency services, but as a reminder, we have 3 main missions: cadet programs, aerospace education, and in our case, near and dear to our hearts, emergency services. And that is what we're going to focus on right now. Uh-oh. No, I'm going to skip that. That was a longer video, but we're kind of in a compressed time frame here. It kind of summed up all the CAP ES services. It was pretty cool. Maybe if we've got some time, I'll run it at the end. But top of the list, in time of declared national emergency, we will operate under CAP OPLAN 1000. Basically, what this means when they define national emergency is a time of war. The functions that we perform, however, are pretty much the same as what we do in peacetime in terms of our actual physical operations, and that's going to be to provide communication networks, provide assessment of damage, support state and regional airlifts, move people around. And the one that we normally don't play around with, and I'm not sure how the training gets done on that, is to provide radiological monitoring and decontamination teams if we really have a shooting war. I'm not sure we're going to have much to look at if that happens, but this is begun in 1941. Civil Air Patrol was created prior to Pearl Harbor. We are currently a benevolent organization. Back in during World War II, you heard about out on the East Coast, sub chasers and cap aircraft dropping bombs on submarines. We don't do that now. We don't train for it. We're not prepared for it. We are a benevolent organization, and we provide all that back support that could be necessary if the continental United States really spooled up for a shooting war. While our troops are moving overseas, CAP will fill in the continental U.S. and handle whatever the Air Force needs us to handle. So that brings us to our peacetime disaster relief mission. The reason that we standardize our training is because a Civil Air Patrol qualified person can function anywhere in the continental United States that they are called and authorized to go to. Hurricane Katrina saw CAP units and personnel moving from all over the United States to handle the needs of that disaster. Currently, CAP is working food banks, especially in Illinois. We've got ground personnel who are dedicating manpower to supporting our peacetime relief efforts. Of course, search and rescue, that's the part that air crews hear the most about, and one of the things we train the most for, and that's primarily in the training end. You usually do a lot of ELT searches, but as a general rule, emergency services, search and rescue is a component. Counter drug operations, for those of us in Illinois, Southern Illinois had an ongoing counter drug program and funding. The funding for counter drugs has been scaled back. We don't hear a whole lot about that, especially here in Illinois right now, but that is an arm of RES services. And Homeland Security. This one I do want to show, so I need to shift slides here real quick. This is kind of a fun slide. Give you some idea of some of the support we give to Homeland Security. And I think I'm getting faster with this. Stand by. I'm almost there. Got a thumbs up on that one, Colonel?
Yep, all good.
There!
So what you saw there was one of the cool things I haven't gotten to do, but I would very much like to give it a shot, is what was happening there was when major events are set up, like the Super Bowl, Civil Air Patrol can be asked to support our military forces in sending ourselves up as targets, penetrating airspace that we don't belong in. Yep, I lost it. Penetrating airspace that we don't belong in to give them the opportunity to practice so that their skills are sharp and that airspace is secure. You know, I keep making the same mistake over and over again, and that's the definition of insanity. Bear with me one more second. I'm working on it. Make it small. Present. Keep stealing my window. There it is. I'm fighting with my screen here. Sorry, folks. Colonel, is that Homeland Security screen up?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Finally, we're responsible for assisting other national agencies under several memorandum of understanding. And this is a word you're going to hear, or a term you're going to hear in the emergency services community. Memorandums of understanding are contractual agreements between CAP and other government agencies, whether they be federal, state, local, beyond the scope of the Air Force, that allow us an easy bridge when they call for our help to work with them and to get assigned the proper missions and legal ground for our operations and our protection when we start talking about CAP insurance or the FICA or FTCE programs. So, what have you gotten yourself into as a CAP mission scanner? And let's dig into that and talk about the job, like a job interview. The primary role of the CAP mission scanner. You know, if we were in a classroom, I'd just have somebody raise their hand and tell me what they think, but we're going to keep blazing through because I know Mike's got a lot of things to do. The primary role of the CAP mission scanner, do you think it's A, make the coffee run for the crew? B, carry the luggage? Or C, both A and B? Again, going back a few slides, remember you are not the low man on the pole. As a matter of fact, as a member of a CAP crew, air crew, more often than not, if the scanner is required, you are the package. You're the deliverable. You're the person that we as air crew pilots, observers need to get to the area that they are tasking us to work so that you can do your job. The pilot and the observer have a whole list of other jobs that they have to handle during the mission. And the mission scanner is responsible for the one thing that that airplane is going out for on a search and rescue mission, and that is to keep your eyes on the ground, to look for whatever it is we're being tasked to find, to assess whatever damage we're being asked to assess. The scanner's primary role is effective visual search by maintaining constant eye contact with the ground. Kind of sounds like the answer to a test question. Everyone is important on the aircraft, including the scanner. So we go back to that Uncle Sam photo where you're all responsible, you're all important. Quick overview, the mission pilot is the aircraft commander. They're responsible for the safe operation of the aircraft, the safety of the crew, and in the absence of a qualified observer, they often have to take on the observer duties. They do not have the opportunity or the need to be looking at the ground. When I'm flying as a mission pilot, my job is to drive the bus. I take the crew where they need to go and they tell me what they need. Typically, obviously the pilot's up front on the left. The mission observer will be up front on the right. The scanners will occupy the back seats. In this case, this is a GA8, so there's a lot of back seats. In the 172s and the 182s, which are our primary dispatch aircraft, you'll have 2 seats in the back, and the scanner can occupy either one, depending on how the mission profile is going to be flown. Sometimes, in the absence of a mission observer, you may find that the mission scanner, if they're comfortable and the pilot thinks it's necessary or worthwhile, the mission scanner will sit up front. There are also instances where maybe the scanner needs to shift from side to side to look out both sides of the airplane, and maybe that front seat won't be occupied if there's no mission observer. One thing you are going to need to know is what the mission observer's other duties are. You can read those in your training material, but just briefly, the mission observer is the mission commander in most instances. Where the aircraft commander handles the safety and the movement of the aircraft, the mission commander or the observer is responsible for the deliverable. They're responsible for getting the tasking taken care of. They run all the same duties as a scanner, plus they handle planning, situational awareness, They assist in monitoring the fuel, ELT equipment if you're doing an ELT search, handling radios, coordinating the scanner operations and their job, handling the flight log or making sure someone gets it done, and general mission administration. So if it has nothing to do with moving the airplane, the mission observer is the boss. So as a mission scanner, you get the phone call and you're sent out to do a mission, or you're being called on to do a mission. Excuse me while I change slides. What are your other duties and responsibilities? There are a few of them. You don't necessarily just go out to the airplane and sit. Now, once it's go time and you're in the search area, your eyes are on the ground. But in between, there's some other things that go on. Now, I've got this checklist that I use, and I call it the 4 Ps. This is mine. This is my thought process. It's not a Cap-NISA thing, but it kind of helps organize the things you got to think of as you spool up for a mission. Personal, prepared, procedures, and paperwork. So you get the phone call, and they ask you, hey, we've got a mission. We need you to be at such and such an airport and at a certain time. What's the first thing you need to do before you ask your significant other if you can go out and play with the cap? The first thing you're going to do is, am I fit for duty? And how do we know if we're fit for duty? How do we know that we're ready to go out and fly? Because all of us in our capacity as volunteers want to go. We want that call. We want to make a difference. We want to get out there and do the job. But you need to know your limitations. You need to know if you can perform in the function that CAP is asking you to perform. And we use what's called the I'm Safe checklist as step 1 when we're called to go somewhere. And the I'm Safe checklist is pretty straightforward. Do you have any illness? Are you feeling well? Do you belong in an airplane today? Are you on any medication? Especially, if you can't drive, you certainly shouldn't be getting in an airplane, whether you're flying it or not. Are you under stress? Did you just move and your house is in disarray? Are you having trouble at home? Should you be in an airplane? Alcohol limitations. Did you have a drink? Have you had a drink in the last 8 hours, 12 hours? What's your capacity? Are you tired? Did you pull a double shift and you were in the middle of your SAC time and you got that call and you haven't had a call in a year and you're waiting to go? Should you be in the airplane? And are you emotionally put together? Are you dealing with some of the things that life throws at you? Are you dealing with the death of a loved one? Are you dealing with something that's just got you on edge, not necessarily stressed, but just not right? Do you belong in the airplane? If you can say no to all those things and you're good to go, then the last thing you need to worry about for your personal self is, what is this mission going to demand of me in terms of time and commitment? Under 70-1, we have duty limitations. Section 9.7, that's probably going to be the first thing as a scanner you're going to want to look up, because that's absolutely pertinent to all aircrew members. We have duty limitations. Just a brief overview, it's better if you read it. We've got a 14-hour maximum duty day. It can be extended at the wing level to 16 hours. And you have to have no more than 9 hours of flight time in between rest periods. And a crew is required 10 hours of crew rest before or between your duty days. The next P, am I prepared? Do you have everything you need to perform the mission? This is going to require another checklist, and this checklist is very subjective, so I don't put one out. It's something that you kind of learn as you learn the job. It's subjective in environment. It's subjective in time of year. It's subjective with regard to the mission that you're going to fly. Those of you who are ground people, just grabbing your 72-hour pack and heading out the door isn't necessarily going to handle it. First, you're probably not going to be able to take it on the airplane because there's too much weight in it anyway. But are you prepared? As a scanner, start to watch how others perform. You can contact myself or others and talk about what some of the things that you should keep in your go pack or consider. Number one, you make your own checklist. Number two, as I said, you never know where you're at and what your environment's going to be. Make sure you're dressed appropriately for the mission you're about to undertake. Keeping in mind that just because it's cold on the ground, it's not necessarily going to be freezing in the aircraft, although a lot of them can be kind of cold. You're going to get used to what you can and can't wear. You're going to need to consider equipment. Again, very subjective. You're going to need things like the proper charts and maps. Not always aviation related. And we're going to talk about some of this stuff when we get into more of the training on how to do search patterns and what you're looking for, what kind of maps you're going to want to bring. Binoculars, headsets, cameras, writing material. And then, a survival pack. Does the aircraft have survival equipment in it? What kind of environment are you working in? Again, all subjective. Here in Illinois, you can be on a cell phone talking to somebody for help before the engine stops on an aircraft out in the mountains, up in Alaska, out west, out over the coast of Florida. They've got a different survival requirement. Train as if you're going anywhere. Be ready to take that call, especially for a national emergency where you may be sent to Louisiana and flying out over water areas. So equipment. Documentation, your papers, please. In order to fly as any mission air crew, you have to have a CAP ID card, a Form 101, and in the NISA training stuff, they talk about the Form 76, which is a radio operator's license that is no longer required. We handle that through ICUT. The form still exists if you bump into a municipality that requires it, but don't give the Form 76 a whole lot of thought. The 101 card, again, I'm not sure who we're working with, so I'm going to go with the lowest common denominator and assume none of you have ever seen one. The 101 card is in your ops quals in e-services, so you're going to go into e-services. You're going to go to ops quals, and there will be a drop down from the menu for your 101 card. And this is what it looks like. Print it out. Take it with you. Your CAP ID. You should all have one of those if you're a member in good standing. What procedures do you need to follow? You as the scanner, prior to getting your eyes on the ground, need to help the crew with avoiding obstacles during taxi, maintain the sterile cockpit when required, and we'll talk about more of that during crew operations. Employ effective scanning techniques. Those are your procedures. The third P. The fourth P. And it's the rest of the presentation, because in any bureaucracy, there's plenty of it. What about the paperwork? While you're on mission, you're going to be taking notes. You're going to be writing down observations. You're going to be putting together your own form of reports for observations, making sketches and notes. You're also going to be responsible for helping the crew fill out the after action reports and to make sure that everything is squared away at the end through WIMRs. And there's even more paperwork. So if I haven't scared you away yet, here it comes. At the end of the mission, we're going to be completing the debriefs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that liability and mishap reporting. Reimbursement for expenses, that's a good thing. Training and currency records. This is an example of a flight mission debrief section in WIMRs. Usually down here on the bottom, I don't know if you can see my arrow. I should turn on the little pointer thing here. Down here, there would be a button to push that would get you this screen, and it would say debrief. And in the debrief, usually the pilot and the observer is going to fill in most of this information, but the screen that you're going to be interested in, I guess I got to turn the pointer off to change screens, is going to be down in this section where you're going to talk about the summary of what you did, results and deliverables, weather conditions. And I want to say something that I found was very interesting when I trained. The person talking about weather conditions mentioned to me, especially for you pilots, our habit is to talk about weather in terms of pilots. If you're a scanner and you're talking to a debriefer and you're trying to tell them what your weather conditions were, don't tell them it was VFR and the ceiling was, 1,000 broken. What you want to tell them is, I could see for 3 miles, or I could see for 5 miles, or it was so hazy out that I couldn't see anything. You want to speak in layman's terms for the reason of the mission commander is going to find that information very valuable when he's talking to non-pilots, when he's trying to decide how to send out the next team, when he's trying to decide how to process the information that they were given. The other important thing here is sortie files. Sortie files can be found here. If you hit the sortie files button, that's where you're going to send any information that you may have to download. The screen's going to come up. You're going to select the folder of what you need to put in. For example, if you are, you want to put in a paper 104, or under other, you want to download some pictures. Now, I know the aerial photographers have a different method for downloading pictures, but if you've taken some cell phone shots and you want to throw them into the mission information, you can do that. Most CAP mission forms are electronic, but there are some drawbacks to that. Everything we can find is on waivers, and I have to say that as a training op, we spend a lot of time working on the electronic side, but I have to admit, I haven't found a whole lot of training for that other contingency. What if? What if you end up, and I just threw this picture in there because it suggests remote. What if you end up somewhere where there is no power yet? What if you end up somewhere where the infrastructure is completely destroyed and you're limited to internet, and the commander is delegating who has access to the Wi-Fi that may have been brought in? You're going to have to go to the paper method. And there are rules for filling out mission paperwork. Avoid using liquid paper to make corrections. If you do need to make a correction, don't scribble it out. It should be legible so that it can be referenced as a whole package. So you strike a line through it, write what you need to do correctly, and initial it. Don't use signature labels or stamps. Attach copies of all receipts and pertinent information. Do not leave any blanks. Use NA or none if you have to. And always review yourself a couple of times, or have a crew member review your NAs to make sure that indeed is an NA item. When you do make attachments, you need to have your name on them, the N number of the aircraft, which is the identifying number of the aircraft, mission and sortie numbers, and the hops times. This is going to be more of an OJT item. You're going to see what to put in, because I guarantee what's going to happen is you're going to turn something in, and an AOB air boss or an IC or a flight release officer is going to jump on you. Hey, you forgot this, you forgot that, go back and fix it. It's going to happen. Then you're going to know it. And everything that you download or upload into your mission files needs to be in a PDF format. So if you don't already have one, I recommend downloading a PDF app for your smartphones. I use Cam Scanner, CAM Scan. Cam Scan. It's worked great for me. I can take a picture, it'll turn it into a PDF, and I can email it to my CAP email, and it moves things along quite quickly. Now, I know we've been drinking from the fire hose. We're going to keep going. Splash a little bit on your face. Relax. And here's our last sprint to the end of the boring part. Does anybody remember what 62-2 is? And again, we're not in a fun classroom and I can't see your faces with my PowerPoint, so I'm going to tell you 62-2 was mishap reporting. What we're looking at in this case is an aircraft that actually landed on something other than an airport. They're off-site, and they're going to have to fill out the paperwork to explain why they're off-site. The thing you need to note for your own knowledge and for your tests is that this needs to be done within 48 hours by the incident commander. So you've got to get it to him or her, and they need to send it up the chain within 48 hours. Mishap reporting. Now we're back to FECA, FTCA, and CAP insurance. We're going to drill down into that a little bit. FECA and FTCA apply to us as federal volunteers when we are working under Air Force missions, a mission number that is going to have an A in it. A dash such and, or I'm sorry, yeah, it'll have an A in it. It'll have all the backing of the Air Force. It's the Air Force that's telling us what to do. This is important to know because if something does happen to you, you're going to need to know through 900-5 what your rights are, what your protections are, and what is going to happen to make you whole. These have to have Air Force mission numbers with them. For everything else, state, local, unless the Air Force has delegated you to go and do it, if it's through a memorandum of understanding between CAP and Illinois, for example, that's going to be under the CAP corporate insurance. And you can read more about those details in 900-5. But know, as a volunteer, you are protected to some degree from injury and harm. You're also protected if you are operating within the rules, by the regulations, not negligent, and have caused damage to property that needs to be made right. FTCA is going to cover you for that. Dig into this, please. If you go into your training information, you're going to find that there is an entire section on that stuff. CAP Form 108. CAP Form 108 is the form you fill out to get reimbursed. Now, what you get reimbursed for and how much and for what mission you're on is subjective to the operation that you're on. We're not going to drill into that too much right now. Just know that CAP Form 108 is what you fill out to get your money back. And finally, under e-services, once you've gone out, you've done your 4 Ps, you've flown the mission, it was a great mission, you got home, you had deliverables, everything was all set. Now you want to make sure your qualifications are updated at the end of the day. You're going to go in and under Ops Quals, you're going to find the selection that you're looking for. This happens to be an AP selection, and you're going to put in your date. Hopefully, while you were out, and I'm going to give you some advice when you're training to finish your scanner quals when you do your flights. Make sure you figure out who your evaluator is going to be. SARXs can get very confusing and very chaotic. Before you leave, there's nothing wrong with you making sure somebody has an understanding that you are going to be submitting a request for validation to them. That's who your evaluator is going to be. That's going to be a CAP number, CAP ID number. A mission ID number, not always required, but when you're doing your flights, you'll end up with mission ID numbers. You send that in, and or you check the box, you submit it, and the evaluator will get pinged, and they will approve your item, provided that you have the understanding that you did what you were supposed to do, and they agree that you are proficient. There are procedures for a denial, but that's not part of our training today. So I'm done. We've discussed the ES missions, mission scattered duties and responsibilities, which is P2013, general rules for entering data in forms, which is P2015, Liability coverage is P2014. We talked about keeping logs and information on the mission, and the use of e-services and keeping your own training and qualification records. I do not have any more at this time. Does a mishap report, Lieutenant Cittadino and Colonel 30acre, have you been watching the chat?
This is Cittadino. I caught a couple of questions on chat that I can respond to. We can go through that. First, I had a couple of questions where people were asking about getting the materials. And as Lieutenant Gugalas mentioned at the start, as far as the materials here, the best thing to do is to go to the NISA website, nisa.cap.gov, and you will be able then to go to the curriculum. You're looking for the Mission Air School MAS curriculum, and you'll find all of the materials that you need for this course there. That's probably the most efficient way that I think of for you to get the materials you need. You'll find the slides, you'll find the task guides, you'll find the reference guide, and the rest right there on the NISA website.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Okay. Question. Yeah, there was a question. Does a mishap report, is that the same as the NASA report? And the answer is no. The NASA report is related to the FAA. The mishap report is something that's internal to CAP. You may, if the situation was such for the pilot, want to do a NASA report, but that's a totally separate thing. And then the last one was, there was somebody made a comment about having a problem viewing the slides. I just, I guess a couple of things. In order to view the slides, you do need to have a PowerPoint viewer of some kind, because the slides are PowerPoint slides. So you would need Microsoft Office or LibreOffice or OpenOffice or one of those programs that will allow you to view slides. There may also be some free PowerPoint viewers. I don't know them off the top of my head, but we can certainly look for that. If indeed that was, my guess is the problem was whoever was asking that question didn't have the appropriate viewer.
Okay,
So,
I see one here. Is this slideshow on the NISA site? The slideshow that I used for my discussion was my own. I'm happy to send it to you. The NISA slides do cover the same material, and they are just list in Word format. So if you want the slides that I sent out or I used, just send me a note on the. Actually, I'll put my email out here, and you can request it, and I'll send it to you.
And looks like most people have, but if you haven't yet, please put that those task numbers in the chat. That way we can verify that you were here and listening. So we can go back and verify when you guys enter that information into OpSqualls. This is how we kind of double check to make sure you guys are paying attention.
Lieutenant Cittadino, I'm going to, while you're doing your presentation, I'll throw together a quick slide with my email on it. Would you like, do you have a problem with your email going on there, your CAP email?
No, feel free. My CAP ID, my CAP email, please put it on there.
Okay, so what I'll do is while he's doing his, I'll whip into PowerPoint, throw up a quick slide, and put our information up there.
Okay, I'm going to present now. And can everybody see? Oops. Can everybody see my window at this point?
Yes, and
Yeah.
couple things. Somebody asked, do we enter this information in the squirter? That's up to you guys. You want to have them enter it now? You want to? I wasn't sure what the process was with you guys. Wait.
Mike, I'm thinking wait till the end. I think Andy wants to handle that with the test at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, the format here is we're going to go through the training, and then the last night is going to be a comprehensive test that's based on the NISA test. So that'll cover all the squirter items at one time.
Okay. And the other thing is somebody was asking if they can take a quick break, which I kind of agree with. I'm going for about a little over an hour and a half now, so we can take maybe 5 minutes or something.
Sure. It's 8:22 now or close to that. I've got a lot of material, and quite frankly, we're probably going to run late tonight. So 5 minutes, but we probably don't want to keep it any longer than that.
Go ahead. Try to be back before 5 minutes. Is it? The first night always goes a little longer. So I want some of the people that are different different wings on different coasts, especially on the East Coast. It's going to be kind of late for you, so we're going to do our best. But
yeah, I'll try to speed it up a little bit so we don't run too over. But I would say at this point we're probably going to run a little bit over the allotted time.
Yeah, we're jamming a lot of material. So for you folks, the reading is going to be important for you. We're shaving at least 10 minutes off per presentation compared to what they do during the week at NISA.
Okay, so I'm going to actually stop presenting for the moment. So let's take a break. Let's come back at in about 3 minutes. And I'll present again then, and we'll get started.
So, if you haven't left yet, try to be back about 8:26 or so. That's about 2 minutes, 3 minutes from now.
Excuse me, Lieutenant Gugala.
Yes, sir.
Did you say you were going to post your email for this part of the slideshow that you did, or were you going to do that at the end or someone?
I'm making the slide right now. I am going to post it. We'll probably do it at the end of Lieutenant Cinedino's first presentation. Does that sound good?
That sounds fine. I just want to make sure I heard you right.
Yep, that's what I'm doing. We're going to flash the slide so that you can see his and my info.
Thank you. One more thing. When you brought up the radiation and you were talking about the radiation and I can't think of anything you were saying.
Yeah, radiation monitoring. Mm-hmm.
Right. In Florida, we're forced to have the National Guard, which has a team that's at every major event. And their control vehicle can tell who's got a pacemaker, who has what, up to whatever numbers that they're in their range anyhow.
Oh, yeah?
And then they're portable guys that are walking around the whole time and looking at their meters.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
They've got quite a setup. And they were, any time they would have a major like Daytona race, Sebring race, football events. They don't make all of the football events because they can't, if they have them in Florida, separate places, but they'll have the major ones. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
They're based out of Blanding.
Okay.
And I got to know them because I did all the refreshers for their EMS side.
Okay.
There was only one paramedic, but most of them were EMTs. But that, they had that qualification, and which made them, I guess, more qualified to do more than just the radiation checks.
Sure. I don't know. Maybe Lieutenant Colonel 30 Acre can answer that. Do we mess around with that in Illinois at all?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, Ed, I think we've had a few minutes, and I'd like to get started. Colonel Thirdacre, if you want, we can wait another minute before we get started in case some people may not have returned. But otherwise, I think we need to move along.
I think most people are here. I did have somebody put RH in the chat. Did you have a question, Thomas Dornberger?
Yes, sir. In regard to the radiation thing, wouldn't you need to have some sort of hazmat training, at least to an operations level, if not a technician level, for something like that?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I had to put it in there is because it's part of our op spec, and it's a no item for your KNOW, no item for your scanner quals. But you know, we're hard pressed to find anybody who has messed around with that as an air crew. You know, we're talking about a really bad scenario, and I'm not even sure how they would pull that trigger, but it's written as something that we can engage in if properly trained and tasked.
Yeah, the program used to exist, but I think they discontinued it like in the mid 90s, late 90s. They discontinued the whole thing, but there used to be a whole training program for CAP on that.
Okay, I want to present now, and we can move forward.
I've made a slide for after your presentation with our emails so everybody can see it. But if you go through the chat, I just put them both in there also, if you're anxious to grab those emails.
Okay. So everybody should be able to see my slide now.
Yep, I got it.
Okay. So we're going to move on to chapter 2, which is aircraft familiarization. This is a pretty packed chapter, actually. The main objectives of this chapter are to, I'm going to skip this actually and go over here to the tasks that this chapter is covering. The main objectives of this chapter are going to be to discuss or provide an overview actually of aircraft systems, aircraft instrumentation, and basically aircraft safety and safe handling procedures. The overview is oriented principally toward those who do not have familiarity with aircraft. You know, if you're new to CAP and you're new to aircraft, this is going to get you familiar with it. The aspect about ground operations and safety really applies to everybody, whether you're familiar with aircraft or not. So in terms of why do we need to know any of this stuff anyway, especially for those who may be not familiar with aircraft too much. And I'm going to be in the scanner, I'm in the back seat, I'm, you know, not flying the plane, whether I need to know this. Well, it's the responsibility of everybody in the air crew is responsible for the safety of the mission. And the more aware you are of how the aircraft operates and what some of the considerations are in regards to the operation of the aircraft, the more aware and able you're going to be conscious of stuff that may affect the safety of the mission and speak up about it. Also, the more aware you are of how everything works, the more comfortable you're likely to be with the aircraft and with being in the aircraft. So it's really knowledge is power, and that's why you want to know at least some of this stuff. So CAP is principally fleeted with Cessna 172s and 182s. They're high-wing, single-engine, fixed-landing gear aircraft with a configuration that's basically the same as the configuration that's present on the slide. So here we've got a couple of the overview of the structure of a typical CAP aircraft. We have, of course, the wings, which create the lift that's going to bring the aircraft into the air. And the wings are attached to the fuselage, which houses the cabin for the crew and passengers. Also, the storage for anything and equipment in the plane is in the fuselage. The front of the fuselage, also called the nose, has the engine and propeller. The rear of the fuselage has a horizontal and vertical stabilizers, and control surfaces. And collectively, these control surfaces are called the empennage. We're going to discuss some of the control surfaces on the aircraft and how they affect the flight of the aircraft and the operation. First thing I'm going to mention here are the flaps, which you see on the flaps are located on the wings on the inside of the wings. They're movable sections of the wing, and they can change the shape of the wing to increase lift and drag, which helps the aircraft to fly at low speed. Outside of the wings, we have the ailerons, which are control surfaces that affect the aircraft's direction. The elevator and the rudder are also all control surfaces that provide directional control to the aircraft when it's in the air. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at how those surfaces operate. We'll start off here with the elevator. The elevator controls the direction of the aircraft or rotation of the aircraft around its lateral axis, nose up or nose down, and that's called pitch. It works by, if the pilot pulls back on the control yoke or the control stick, that would cause the elevator to move in an upward direction, and that will change the flow of air on the tail section to force the tail section down, which will force the nose of the aircraft up or cause the aircraft to pitch up. Likewise, pushing forward on the control stick or the control yoke would do the reverse and cause the aircraft to pitch down. The ailerons on the wing are responsible for the rotation of the aircraft around its longitudinal axis. If the pilot wanted to turn to the right, he would turn the control stick or the control yoke to the right. That would cause the right aileron to raise up, which will decrease the lift on the right aileron. At the same time, it causes the left aileron to move down, so they work in opposite directions, which increases the lift on the left wing. That change in lift would cause the aircraft to roll in a rightward direction, and that change in the lift on the wings, as well in conjunction with the aircraft's forward motion, would cause the aircraft to turn to the right. Likewise, moving the control stick and control yoke to the left would cause the same thing to happen to the left. And that's called rolling. The rotation around longitudinal axis is called roll. Finally, we have the location around the vertical axis, which is affected by the rudder. And that is called yaw. And if the pilot pressed on the left rudder pedal, the rudder will swing to the left. This would cause the tail of the aircraft to move over to the right and push the nose of the aircraft to the left. When the aircraft is making a turn, it's a combination of the rolling and yawing axes that allow the aircraft to turn in a smooth and even manner. So in addition to the major control surfaces, there's also minor control surfaces on the elevator and some aircraft, on the elevator and in some aircraft on the rudder. And that's the trim tabs. The trim tab is operated by a wheel in the cockpit, and it provides a fine amount of control, principally on the elevator. And its purpose is to allow to release the pressure that the pilot has to apply to the control yoke or control stick to keep the airplane flying in a fixed attitude. So typically when the aircraft is in level flight, we'll trim it so that it stays in level flight at a given altitude and speed without the pilot having to constantly be putting pressure on the yoke and tiring themselves out. It can also be used, trim can also be used when the aircraft is climbing or descending or turning to keep it constant in those directions. Now we're going to move to the inside of the aircraft and start to talk about some of the aircraft instrumentation. The first thing we're going to mention here is the fuel selector valve. This is present on both aircrafts. Both the Cessna 172 and the 182 have two fuel tanks, one in each wing to feed fuel to the engine. And the fuel selector valve allows the pilot to choose if they want to feed fuel to the engine equally through both tanks or exclusively to the left or the right tank, which the pilot may choose to do sometimes if the amount of fuel in the tanks is uneven and he wishes to balance that off to keep the aircraft better trimmed. This is located on the floor of the aircraft. Now we're going to move over to aircraft instrumentation. And we're going to start off that with talking about the magnetic compass, also sometimes called a wet compass. The magnetic compass consists basically of a magnetized sphere or cylinder with degree markings around the circumference. It's in a housing suspended in a clear liquid that allows it to rotate freely, hence the name wet compass. One of the limitations of a magnetic compass, however, is that a magnetic compass only reads correctly when the aircraft is in straight or level flight. When the aircraft is turning and banking, the speed changes can cause the compass to read inaccurately, and which is known as leading or lagging. And that problem with the magnetic compass is going to be addressed with the next instrument that we're going to talk about. Finally, I want to mention that the magnetic compass is not the primary navigation instrument in the aircraft. It is basically used for reference and for backup. So related to the compass, we have the heading indicator, which is the other directional instrument that I wanted to mention. This is a gyroscopically driven instrument. Again, we have a dial with the 360 degrees marked off on it. And it is, as opposed to the magnetic compass, it does not suffer from the lagging and leading. It's a very precise and accurate instrument due to the gyroscopic operation. However, it has its own drawback, and that is that over time, the gyroscopes will drift. And because of that, over time, this will read inaccurately. So it's necessary during flight for the pilot to periodically readjust the heading indicator to make it match the magnetic compass. And as I mentioned, this is gyroscopically driven, and it's typically driven by the vacuum system of the aircraft. Next, we have the altimeter. The altimeter is an instrument that uses static pressure. It's one of the instruments that uses static pressure in the aircraft, and it allows the pilot to know what the altitude of the aircraft is above mean sea level. And as I mentioned, this is driven by static pressure, and it's basically measuring the pressure of the outside air against an internal diaphragm to indicate the static pressure. Because pressure is different in different locations, the pilot is able to adjust this instrument, which you can see in this small window, to reflect the static pressure, or excuse me, to reflect the barometric pressure at sea level at a given location. That keeps the instrument running accurately. Next, we have the turn coordinator. This is electrically driven, and it's basically a combination of instruments. On the top, you see the small airplane with the wingtips touching a pair of tick marks on the outside of the instrument, on the rim. And there's another pair of tick marks below it. When the pilot's making a turn, the little airplane will bank along with the turn. And if the pilot lines up the wingtip of the aircraft with the lower mark on the rim in the turn, he is now making what is called the standard rate turn, which will result in the aircraft turning a complete 360-degree circle in 2 minutes. Below that is what's called the inclinometer. It's a curved tube filled with liquid in which there's a small ball. And here you see the ball resting between a couple of reference markers. This is used to allow the pilot, as I mentioned, the action of the ailerons and rudder together is what makes the aircraft turn smoothly. And the inclinometer allows the pilot to judge how much rudder is being applied and to ensure that he's applying the appropriate amount of left or right rudder to keep the airplane turning smoothly. When that little ball is in the center of those reference marks, like you see it here, that means that the aircraft is turning in a smooth and even manner. Next, we have the attitude indicator. This is another gyroscopic instrument, again, driven by the aircraft's vacuum system. We have this little airplane symbol with wings and a nose. And it's divided into two hemispheres, brown for the ground, blue for the sky. And it is also essentially two instruments in one. The movement of the little airplane up or down into the brown or blue area allows the pilot to determine what the pitch of the aircraft is. Here we see it, the wings lined up with the horizon line, which means this aircraft is in level flight. If it was pitched into the blue, it's climbing. If it was pitched down into the brown, the aircraft is descending. And the graduations here allow the pilot to determine how much pitch in degrees the aircraft is currently at. In addition to that, around the rim, we have markings that allow the pilot to determine the bank angle that the aircraft is in a turn. When he turns, this little yellow triangle is going to move left or right depending upon the direction of the turn. Here, where it's lined up with this right reference triangle, we're straight ahead out of a turn. Otherwise, that's 10, 20 degrees, 30, 45, or 60 degrees of bank that the pilot can look at the attitude indicator and determine how much bank they're applying to a turn. Next, we have the airspeed indicator. This indicates to the pilot how fast the aircraft is moving through the air. In addition to this being part of the static pressure system, it also uses ram pressure. There's a opening on the aircraft called a pitot tube that is sensing the air as the aircraft moves through the air, and that's used to help indicate the airspeed. In addition to the airspeed, we see that there are various colored markings or arcs along the outside. These give the pilot the various speed ranges of operation for the aircraft. The green arc is what's called the normal operating range. That's the range at which the aircraft can fly, maneuver, and suffer turbulence without structural damage. The yellow arc, the short yellow arc, is called the caution range. And that's the speed at which, while the aircraft is capable of flying, flight through turbulent air or abrupt maneuvers should be avoided because they could cause structural damage in that speed range. Finally, we have the never exceed speed, which is the speed above which the plane should not be flown without risk of structural damage. Finally, we have this inner white arc, which is the flap operating range. And that's the range of airspeeds that the plane can be flown with the flaps deployed or lowered. The bottom of the green arc is the stall speed with the flaps retracted. The bottom of the white arc is the stall speed of the aircraft with the flaps extended. Next, we have the vertical speed indicator, another static pressure instrument. This is used in conjunction with the altimeter to allow the pilot to determine the rate at which he might be climbing or descending. And it's graduated to tell here to show how fast the plane is climbing or descending in hundreds of feet per minute. Next, we have the tachometer. The tachometer will show the RPM of the aircraft's propeller. The Cessna 172 is an aircraft with what is called a fixed pitch propeller, which is one that the pilot cannot change the pitch up while the aircraft is in flight. That propeller is mounted directly onto the engine's crankshaft, so the speed of the propeller and the speed of the RPM are the same. In that case, the tachometer not only gives the speed of the propeller, but also tells the pilot how much output or how much power the engine is outputting. The Cessna 182 has what's called a variable speed propeller or variable pitch propeller, which allows the pilot to alter the pitch of the propeller while the aircraft is in flight. That propeller is connected to the engine through a gearing mechanism, And so the RPM on the tachometer reflects the RPM of the propeller, not necessarily the power output of the engine, which is measured through a different instrument. And here we are with a few additional engine instruments that may vary from plane to plane. As I mentioned, for a variable pitch propeller, the engine output is not measured directly by the tachometer. Rather, the manifold pressure is used by the pilot to determine what the engine power is. All the aircraft will have a fuel gauge indicating the amount of fuel in the tanks. It's important to note that the only requirement of fuel gauges is that they are accurate when empty. And we'll make some mention about fuel management later on. The aircraft will mostly have a fuel flow gauge, which indicates how fast fuel is being consumed by the aircraft. They will have oil temperature and pressure gauges. They will generally have vacuum and generator gauges that indicate that the vacuum system is operating properly and that the alternator in the aircraft is charging the battery. Some aircraft may also have gas exhaust temperature gauges. And there also may be other gauges not pictured here that may be in aircraft depending upon the configuration of the type of aircraft. So moving from the aircraft instruments, we're going to look at an aircraft's radios. CAP radios are equipped with both navigation and communication radios. And generally, CAP aircraft will have a pair, and many aircraft will have a pair of navigation and communication radios for redundancy. And here in the radio window, we see that we've got a pair of frequencies. One is the use frequency or in-use frequency. The other is the standby frequency. The in-use frequency is the one that the radio is either communicating over to other aircraft or to air traffic control, or that it is receiving from a navigation station for radio navigation. The standby frequency can be set by the pilot by rotating these pair of knobs that are located underneath the standby frequency here in this diagram, in this picture. And by pressing this button here, the pilot is able to flip the standby frequency and the use frequency in a flip-flop manner. This allows the pilot to be able to set a new or different frequency without disrupting the current in-use frequency and then switch over when needed. And here's just a sample of the antennas that you would see on the aircraft for the communication radios. And this aircraft has 2 communication radios because we have 2 antennas. Typically, the antennas for the navigation radios are located off the vertical stabilizer in the tail of the aircraft. And again, we have a pair of navigation radios, so we have a pair of antennas. Additional antennas that may be present are the antennas for the emergency locator transmitters. Here we have this antenna is the antenna for the older 121.5, 243 megahertz emergency locator beacons. These are beacons that emit a radio signal, but that does not contain any location information in it. So locating these beacons requires triangulation either on the ground or in the air. Here we have the antenna for the newer 406 megahertz emergency locator transmitter. And this antenna has GPS location information encoded in it, in the signal. So other antennas you might find on the plane that are of interest are the antennas for the directional finding equipment. CAP aircraft has, because part of our mission has been to locate aircraft that may have been downed, and we do that by locating the emergency location transmitter signal. So CAP aircraft have directional finders that are capable of locating those signals. These wire antennas on the bottom of the plane are for the older L-Tronics directional finder which is capable of locating the 121.5 and the 263 megahertz signals, but not capable of locating the 406 megahertz signal. This tin can looking antenna is for the newer Becker directional finders in the CAP aircraft, which is capable of locating those signals. You might also find on the aircraft these little rod-like appendages that are going to be present on the control surfaces and perhaps on the wings. They're called static wicks, and their purpose is to dissipate static electricity that can build up on the skin of the aircraft due to friction with the air, and that static electricity can interfere with the operation of the comm radios. You want to be careful around these things when you're around an aircraft. They could be easily bent and damaged, and you really don't want to do that. CAP aircraft have GPS systems in them. In this picture here, this is a picture of an Apollo GX, an Apollo GX55 in this picture. This is present in some CAP aircraft. Other CAP aircraft may have different GPSs in them. Several CAP aircrafts use glass panels with the Garmin 1000 GPS, which is beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about tonight. And here, this little dome type antenna on the top is the GPS antenna for the aircraft. CAP aircraft will also have audio panels. And as I mentioned, most of the aircraft will have, or CAP aircraft will have dual comm and navigation radios. The audio panel allows the pilot to choose which communication or navigation radio is currently the one in use, or receiving whose signal is being listened to. It also has a selector panel here that allows the pilot to control how the aircraft's intercom is distributed among the members of the crew. CAP aircraft also have a transponder. The transponder sends out a numerically coded electronic signal that is used by air traffic control to help identify aircraft on radar. This one is showing a transponder code of 1200, which is a generic VFR transponder signal. In some cases, in certain airspaces, the air traffic control may tell the pilot to dial in a specific numeric sequence, which is called the squawk code, which will specifically identify the aircraft to air traffic control. Here's the antenna, that's the typical type of antenna that you'd see for the transponder antenna. And as I mentioned, the aircraft have both communication and navigation radios. And the right here, we have the navigation instrument called an ADF, or automatic direction finder. This is currently obsolete. These have been largely, if not, these have been largely, if not totally, decommissioned, so we're not going to talk about them. The other instrument we have here on the left is a VOR, VHF omnidirectional rangefinder. And it is, VORs are still in use and actually quite wide use, although they are being phased out in favor of GPS. And VOR works by sending out a radio signal that is 360-degree and signal that with the VOR receiver allows the pilot to dial in the receiver so it will give him the specific magnetic direction he needs to fly in order to reach the VOR transmitter. And VORs are located throughout the country. Many of them are located around airports. And while they're an older form of navigation, you can fly cross country by going from VOR to VOR. As we mentioned before, we're going to defer questions. If any questions that have come up from this part, please ask them on chat, and we'll continue with I'm going to continue with the presentation. So now we're going to talk a little bit about aircraft operations, starting with aircraft weight and balance. Now, as I mentioned, the aircraft's wings generate lift to bring the aircraft into the air, and the wings can generate a fixed amount of lift. So they're able to lift a fixed amount of weight, and beyond which they either will not be able to generate lift, or while they may be able to generate lift for the aircraft, it may not be able to fly safely, and we'll talk about some of the issues. The maximum weight for safe operation of the aircraft is set by the aircraft's manufacturer. In addition to weight, the aircraft has a center of gravity or a central balance point, which is also defined by the manufacturer. And all aircraft have a certain envelope of operation in which you can load the aircraft with personnel, fuel, and equipment that will, in doing that, will shift the center of gravity either ahead or behind the center of gravity that's the manufacturer's specification. And all aircraft have a certain envelope by which the center of gravity can be moved forward or backward, in which the aircraft can operate safely. But outside of that envelope, aircraft operation would become unsafe. It's a responsibility of the pilot to compute the weight and the balance operation for the aircraft before every flight and make sure that the loading of the aircraft is safely within the limits set by the manufacturer. So what are some of the things that can go wrong if we don't observe these things? Well, excess weight can affect the aircraft in many ways. One of the significant ways is that takeoff and landing distance is increased. Climb performance is going to be reduced. And additionally, the ability of the aircraft to withstand turbulence in rough air is also going to be reduced if the aircraft is overweight. The most significant of these, really, climb and takeoff and landing is very significant because you can have unfortunate things happen if the aircraft is overloaded, especially on takeoff. Out of forward or nose heavy condition reduces the up authority of the elevator or the ability of the elevator to raise the aircraft's nose. This can impact the ability of the aircraft to flare on landing. Typically when an aircraft with a tricycle gear like ours lands, it lands with the nose in a raised position so that the main gear touches down first, and then the front gear will settle to the runway. And that can be made more difficult if the aircraft is too nose heavy or out of forward. Out of rear CG is just the opposite and reduces the down elevator authority or the ability to lower the nose. This can make stall recovery difficult or impossible. And out of rear is definitely an undesirable CG orientation for that particular reason. When we fly, we want to make sure that the flight is safe. We want to make sure that the aircraft is safe to fly. So before an aircraft is flown, we go through a procedure called a pre-flight. And it's actually a pre-flight outside and inside the aircraft. The outside pre-flight is going to be a general inspection of the aircraft to make sure that there's no visible damage, make sure that the control surfaces are free to move, make sure that all of the ports and openings on the aircraft are unobstructed, that the tires aren't flat, make sure there's no nicks or damage to the propeller, generally to make sure that the outside of the aircraft is safe. Also, we want to check the fuel to make sure that the aircraft has sufficient fuel for the flight. We want to check the oil to make sure that the oil in the engine is sufficient. There's also essentially an in-flight pre-flight, which is done to ensure that the instrumentation and the engine operation is correct. That's what would be called a run-up. That's performed when the aircraft engine has been started before the aircraft takes off. The pre-flight procedures are dictated by the aircraft manufacturer. We can find them in the aircraft's POH or operating manual, or in a card that's available in the aircraft. All CAP aircraft will have the pre-flight procedures within them, located within them. So now we're going to move on from aircraft systems to aircraft safety. And we've got 3 rules of safety for CAP. And the first rule is never sacrifice safety to save time. In fact, for CAP, the real rule is never sacrifice safety, period. Safety is job 1 for CAP. If we don't stay safe, we can't really help anybody else. In order to make sure that we stay safe, one of the other things we do is we want to follow established procedures and checklists. Procedures are quite often dictated by the aircraft manufacturer for certain situations. We also have certain procedures that we're going to dictate for crew behavior in various situations. Procedures ensure that things are done properly. And checklists work with procedures to make sure that when you're following a procedure, you do it in the proper order. You don't do steps out of sequence, or you don't skip steps. If we have to deviate, just as a pilot in an emergency is allowed to deviate from air traffic control, if there's an overriding reason to do so, we can deviate. However, we only want to deviate from established procedures if there's an overriding reason, and if we've done in a reasoned manner where we thought through the current situation and decided that deviating is appropriate. We don't just do it in a haphazard manner. Some other safety around an aircraft. Obviously, we don't smoke around an aircraft. You also want to be careful when operating around an aircraft. You generally want to stay clear of the aircraft when you're not entering or exiting. That's especially important if the aircraft's engine is running, because the spinning propeller can kill somebody. If there's a fire in the aircraft on the ground, such as a fire that might occur during engine startup or taxi, we want to exit the aircraft and also get clear of the aircraft. Moving and loading the aircraft is something that we want to do in a safe manner. In this case, moving the aircraft, it talks about moving a non-powered aircraft manually. And CAP air crews actually have to do a biannual training on proper aircraft moving, ground handling is called. And in loading the aircraft, that goes along with it. We always want to make sure the aircraft is loaded, principally that everything is secured in the aircraft so that nothing goes rattling around in the case that we have a turbulent air or a forced landing situation. Entry and egress, everybody should know how to get into the aircraft, and everybody should know how to get out of the aircraft, especially in an emergency situation. A entry and egress briefing, or an egress briefing really, is part of the crew briefing that's done before every mission, so everybody understands how they're going to exit the aircraft, in what sequence, because you don't have to get out of the front seat before you can get out of the back seat and that sort of thing. So we want to make sure that everybody agrees on how that's going to be done. Seat belts and shoulder harnesses, just like wearing your seatbelt in a car, you wear your seat belts and shoulder harnesses in the aircraft. CAP says that they have to be worn at all times. The exception to that is that observers and scanners can remove them when the aircraft is on flight on mission if wearing them is interfering with their ability to do their duties. However, in any case, they have to have seat belts and shoulder harnesses on whenever the aircraft is landing and taking off. And generally, you don't take them off when you're in flight either. As I mentioned, fuel management. You don't want to run out of gas when you're in the air. And that's somewhat the responsibility of everybody to make sure that the aircraft has sufficient fuel, that we're aware of it. The pilot should make sure that the aircraft is properly fueled, and he should be briefing the crew and discussing with them fuel considerations, especially if the mission is going to require the aircraft to potentially have to stop and refuel somewhere. So you should all have an understanding of what they are and how you're going to manage fuel. CAP actually has requirements for reserves that the aircraft is expected to have a certain amount of reserve and return to the airport at the end of the mission. So safety during taxiing, and taxiing on the airport grounds before we're ready to take off is something that all CAP air crew members really want to participate in. Everybody's responsible for the safety of of the mission. Everybody's responsible for the safety of the aircraft. Whether you're in the front seat or the back seat, you want to keep a lookout for obstacles and other aircraft while the aircraft is moving. You want to make sure that the aircraft is moving safely and at appropriate pace. We taxi at a slow walking pace. We want to maintain appropriate distance behind other aircraft. And we'll talk about that a little bit later again when we get to the wake turbulence section. Another thing that we want to do is observe sterile cockpit. Lieutenant Guglielka had mentioned that already. He's going to talk about it again when he talks about CRM. But basically, a sterile cockpit is that when we're on the ground taxiing and when we're in the air within the confines of the airport's ATC authority, we don't talk about anything other than obstacle avoidance. We don't talk about what we had for lunch. We don't talk about what we're going to do on the mission. We want to keep all unnecessary talk away to avoid distracting the pilot. Obeying flight line hand signals. Flight line marshaling is the act of basically traffic directing a powered aircraft on the ground, where a person called a flight line marshaller will control the movement of the aircraft by giving hand signals to the pilot. It's not something you're likely to experience on your CAP missions, outside the possibility that we had a CAP mission that was involved with the fly-in, because this is usually done where there's a lot of aircraft landing and having to be parked in a small area. We're not going to talk about that further. However, the chapter in the scanner manual the end of this chapter in the scanner manual does cover all of the hand signals that a flight line marshaller would use to control the movement of an aircraft. Again, as we said, everybody helps the pilot when we're taxiing. And part of helping the pilot when we're taxiing is to have some familiarity with airport signs and markings so you're aware of what the regulations around the aircraft or the airport are. First thing is that markings on runways are in white and markings on taxiways are in yellow. And we're going to see that in the next slide. Here we have some taxiways, center lines in yellow. Down below here, we have a boundary marker that's painted on the ground. These boundary markers here with the dashed and solid lines are at the intersection of a taxiway and a runway, or at a runway to runway intersection, and they control the movement of the aircraft onto and off of the runway. An airplane cannot approach from the solid line side and cross over this boundary marker without permission from ATC. If the aircraft is exiting the runway, they would be crossing the dash line side, which they're able to do. They want to make sure when they cross this boundary marker that all of the aircraft through the tail is past the boundary marker to make sure that they're fully off the runway. In addition to the markings on the ground, we're going to find signage around the airport that also acts to inform and control. Mandatory signs, I have a red background with a white inscription. These are signs that indicate entry to runways or other controlled areas on the airport. You cannot, they're warning you of these areas here because you cannot cross an area delimited by a mandatory sign without having permission of ATC. Other signage that you'll see are boundary marker signs. And for signage, as opposed to being yellow on the ground, boundary marker signs are black on a yellow background. And they're there to warn the pilot that some boundary marker that may limit the aircraft's movement is that they're approaching a boundary marker on the ground that may also limit the aircraft's movement. We also have location signs and direction signs that tell the pilot where on the airport they are and how to move about the airport. Taxiways are lettered. Runways are numbered. Location signs, as we see here, are yellow on black. So this is telling the pilot that they are on taxiway Alpha. This is telling the pilot they are on runway 22. Direction signs are the converse. They're black letters on a yellow background. This directional sign is telling the pilot that if they turn to the left, they will be entering taxiway Bravo. This directional sign is a combination sign telling the pilot they are currently on taxiway Alpha. If they turn left or right, they will be entering taxiway Charlie. And if they continue forward in a half-right direction, they will be staying on taxiway Alpha. As the airplane moves around the airport, taxiing to a runway, it is under control of ATC. ATC will give it instructions and as how to proceed on taxi. It may also give it instructions managing its movement or controlling its, curtailing its movement around the airport. A pilot needs to read back to ATC any clearances or instructions that he receives, which is so ATC knows the pilot has received and understood them. And we're going to cover a couple of clearances that you would commonly expect to hear communicated between the pilot and ATC. Taxi 2, this clearance means that the aircraft is cleared by ATC to taxi from its current location to a target runway and has already been authorized to cross any intersecting runways or taxiways along its route. It has not, however, been authorized by ATC to enter the target runway or the destination runway. That requires another authorization from ATC. The pilot may also be told to taxi to and hold short of, which means that they've been partially cleared to, along a route to taxi to a destination runway, but there is some intersecting runway or taxiway that they have to stop at and cannot cross without further permission from ATC to complete the route. Cross runway would be a clearance given to them after they've been told to hold short, and whatever condition on that runway required them to hold short has now been resolved, usually an aircraft landing on the runway, and they can now cross it. On the other hand, hold short might be given to a pilot while they're taxiing because some condition has come up that where they were previously cleared, some condition has now come up that requires them to stop somewhere along their route. And report position finally is about what it says. They want the pilot to identify their position on the airport. And finishing up this section now, we're going to talk about wake turbulence. Wake turbulence is a turbulence that's generated by aircraft when they are producing lift. You can see here in the diagram, they come off the wings of the aircraft and accumulate in vortices around the aircraft's wingtips. This turbulence can be actually quite severe. It increases as the size and power of the aircraft that's producing lift increases. And part of the reason that we taxi, when we taxi, we keep greater distances from larger and heavier aircraft is to protect ourselves from potentially their wake turbulence and also protect ourselves from the backwash from their engines. And as we see, and back to that, as we mentioned before, the larger and heavier an aircraft is, the further behind it we have to taxi or stay when we're taxiing. Wake turbulence is something that has significant impact if an aircraft is landing or taking off. As I said, it happens when the aircraft is creating lift. So wake turbulence is going to occur when an aircraft lands while it's landing, and it ends at the point that the aircraft touches down on the runway. So if you were landing at an airport and you're following another aircraft onto the runway, the pilot would want to touch down above and above the other aircraft's glide path and touch down the runway ahead of the point of touchdown of the other aircraft to avoid its wake turbulence. Likewise, when an aircraft takes off, it's generating turbulence behind it. To avoid its wake turbulence, a pilot would want to rotate off the runway prior to the point of rotation of the aircraft in front of it, and stay at a glide angle, or excuse me, at a climb angle that keeps it above the climb of the aircraft in front of it to avoid that aircraft's wake turbulence. That's finally the end of this section. And in order to try to keep us on time, I'd like to just continue with the next set of slides for the next section and reserve the questions we have for the end of both of these sections. I've got to switch my presentations here for a moment. Let's do this. So now we're going to move on to Chapter 3, Survival and Urgent Care. And I'll probably actually try to speed up going through this chapter a bit in the interest of time so we could stay on our schedule. So what we're talking about when we talk about survival and urgent care is not like a survival course or anything. It's basically how to deal with the possibility that on a CAP mission, you're in an aircraft that must do a forced landing, an off-field landing, and how to deal with an off-field landing, and also assuming that you will not be able to have somebody rescue you right away, but you may have hours or potentially even days of waiting before a rescue can come, how you're supposed to behave and what some of the things you can do to help yourself. A recommendation, which I'll repeat again, is taking a first aid or CPR class. That's a good recommendation, not just from the CAP standpoint or the unlikely possibility that you may be involved in a forced landing in a CAP mission, but if you fly and just in general in life, having first aid or CPR knowledge is a good thing to have. It can help you or help somebody else, in particularly in some situations. So we're going to discuss basic post-crash actions and some survival and urgent care issues. This is going to cover this task in your FAM prep. So what is your most important survival tool? Not surprisingly, it's your attitude. Basically, if you think you can do something, you will. And if you think you can't do something, you won't. So one of the things you want to do is always try to keep your attitude up and do what you can to stay positive. So survival in a crash situation or survival in a forced landing situation actually starts before the mission even starts. And again, that goes with anybody who flies. Before you fly, if you're going to survive an unexpected incident, you want to be prepared. An important part of planning ahead of time is to make sure you have the right clothing. If you're out in the wintertime on a mission, you want to have an appropriate coat, boots, gloves, hats, and that to be able to stay out in the cold. I mean, you may drive to the mission base, stay in a heated hangar, go into a plane that's going to be heated, and figure I don't need to have a lot of bulky clothing on me. But if you want to be prepared for the possibility of something unexpected, make sure you're dressed for the weather. All the CAP planes have a survival kit. Everybody should know where the kit is located. And additionally, as a squadron activity, if the plane's there, it should be inspected periodically and make sure the contents are updated as necessary. Pay attention to flight briefings and modify your personal plan accordingly depending upon what the briefing tells you is going to be the flight path of the aircraft, the terrain, the weather conditions, and the like. A good flight plan, keeping others in the loop and taking advantage of ATC services so everybody knows where you're at, would definitely improve your chances of being found if you had to be in a forced landing situation. When we're on CAP missions, one of the requirements is that we report in on a regular periodic basis with status and location information. Wear your seatbelts. If we were going to be in a forced landing, don't be bouncing around the cockpit. Obviously, if there's a fire, you need to get away from the aircraft. However, there are fire extinguishers in all the CAP aircraft. If possible, take the fire extinguisher with you. This is also another situation where you were in a fast forced landing and you want to exit the aircraft quickly. Why having a pre-flight egress briefing is important. Finally, prior preparation prior to a crash or a forced landing, to a forced landing is important. Follow the procedure for the crew should be all following the procedure for a forced landing, the forced landing checklist. Things such as opening the doors when appropriate, tightening the seat belts and shoulder harnesses, making sure cargo has been secured, the electricity and fuel have been turned off. All of this is covered by a emergency landing checklist, which is why it's important to have those checklists and procedures and follow them. If you have a cell phone with you or a PLB with you, make sure you keep it on you, and so that when you exit the aircraft, you have it with you. Also, know in advance or decide in advance, if you know that you're going to have to do a forced landing, how are you going to handle somebody who might become incapacitated? So clear it away from the aircraft. If you got the fire extinguisher, take it with you. It's going to be a traumatic event, even if it's not a crash event. When I was on my, I think it was like my first scanner training flight, we were flying out of Clough Airport, and we actually were coming in, and not what was nice weather, but ahead of a thunderstorm. And we hit a microburst just as the aircraft was touching down. We wound up bouncing off the runway and eventually got the aircraft back on the runway. But it was still, you know, definitely a surprise. So you're going to be a little bit shook up by any sort of unexpected thing that may happen, or any unexpected mishap that may happen during the landing, especially if it's a forced landing, even if nobody's injured. It's going to be a shocking event. So keep yourself, sip some water, deal with the fact that you're probably going to be in a slight state of shock. Check for injuries. And then once the immediate danger is past, consider rescue. The main thing that you want to do in a situation is to, once the aircraft is down, you want to get everybody out of the plane. You want to get away from the plane. You don't want to run away and hide, but you want to get away from the immediate area of the plane. You want to address any injuries that anybody's suffering and make sure that they're addressed to the greatest extent that's possible. Beyond that, then you can start planning for how you're going to deal with getting rescued or wait to be rescued. So to help with all those actions, we have this handy little acronym called SAGA, which comes from the AOPA, actually, for their Air Safety Institute. It stands for Stabilize, Assess, Gather, and Act. So stabilize basically means if you had a forced landing situation, you're probably going to be a little bit disoriented at first. Your training should get you out of the airplane. Your first thing you'll want to do is try to regain your situational awareness. Make sure that everybody has gotten out of the aircraft. Deal with any injuries that may be present. Try to control your shock. if you have it, try to calm yourself down or sip some water and try to control your shock. And then you can proceed from there once you've kind of gotten your situational awareness done and you're controlling any immediately life-threatening or hazardous situations. Once you've got things in control, you want to assess your situation and report. So the first thing you want to do is take a look around you. What's the status of things? What's the status of the people around you? Do you have to get the emergency kit out of the aircraft? Is it safe to do so? Have you already responded to help with somebody? If you have a PLB now, it might be a good time to turn it on. If you have a cell phone, you might want to try to call out on your cell phone and make contact. But you're going to try now to kind of take stock of what you need. And right now what you need is to basically try to report out that you had a forced landing and let people know that that's happened, and ideally give them some location information. And you're going to do that by using the emergency locator. Transmitter of the plane is probably already gone off, but you would want to activate your PLBs. You would want to use, if you have a handheld radio or if you have a cell phone, you're going to want to try to make contact with somebody to inform them of what's happened and give them information to aid your being rescued. Use your phone. As it says here, even if your phone can't connect, the very fact that you're trying to contact or connect out means that it's pinging a tower, which may help to identify where you guys are at. If you can connect, but you can't really get a good voice connection because of the poor quality of service where you're at, try texting. Texting takes less bandwidth than voice, and you may actually be able to text out a message than even if you can't get a voice message out. If you can get on the radio, if you can get on your cell phone, you want to tell people what's happened, how many people are involved, is anybody injured, give them a location, ideally if long if you have it. That'll greatly help everybody to be able to locate you in a quick manner. I mentioned down here, obviously, while you want to keep trying to make contact with your cell phone, you probably are going to have limited battery life. And in cold situations, once you've tried to make some initial contact, you may want to limit the duration that you do that, and also kind of protect your phone, keep it warm with that so you don't use up the batteries all right away. You may need them later. As we mentioned, provide information. If you can make contact, provide information that helps to tell people what your situation is and where you're located. Once you've done that, then this is an iterative process. You're going to continually assess your situation and determine what you need to do to kind of help yourself in whatever the context is at the moment. Next, you're going to gather. Do I need to get food? Do I need to get clothing? Do I need to get the kit out of the aircraft, the survival kit out of the aircraft? What do I need to do? So you're going to look around and decide, what do I need in order to make the next hour before somebody comes to rescue me, or perhaps what do I need to do to stay overnight before somebody comes to rescue me, or perhaps to stay longer. So as those time frames occur, you're going to look at what do I need to acquire to keep going in the next time frame, and how am I going to get to it? How am I going to get at it? That may include, excuse me, that may include getting firewood if you know that you're going to be stuck overnight, something like that. So you're going to let me look together that. Again, if you're not going, if shelter's not going to be immediate, you should consider what you're going to do to get water, shelter, and food while you're waiting for rescue to come. Last thing is ACT. Basically with ACT, it's already something that we've covered. You want your actions to be important. You only want to act in ways that are going to improve your survival while you're waiting for rescue. You don't want to be wandering off saying, I think I'll just wander into the woods and hope I find a road somewhere. You may want to get firewood for the night, but you don't want to do things that aren't immediately helpful. While you do want to act, while you do may need to do things, you want to try to stay near the aircraft. Even if you have to move somewhat away from the aircraft initially, you want to try to stay near the aircraft. That is your best chance of discovery. People are going to be looking for the aircraft. It's going to be more visible from the ground than you as an individual is going to be. And as I said, this is a iterative process. So you just continue going through it every time frame as it lengthens if you're not going to be rescued immediately. Surviving water is important. You actually should have water with you anyway on your flight because you can get dehydrated in the air. So you should be bringing some extra water with you. There's also should be some water in the CAP survival kits. You may also want to have, in addition to the CAP survival kit, you may want to have your own personal survival kit when you're out flying. And, you know, in that you may want some water purification tablets or some other means of purifying water if you had to use groundwater while you're waiting to be rescued. And you want to be able to signal. If you have a signal mirror, that works. There should be hopefully a tarp or of some kind in the aircraft and some flares in the survival kit. You can use those to signal. You already hopefully would have a PLB and the aircraft's ELT should be running. You also may have your phones, as I said, and also maybe a portable radio that you're going to use to try to signal for help with. Calling up and then trying to signal by making yourself seen, using a signal mirror or some sort of signage. If you're going to make your own signal, use the CLASS acronym. Color, make it unusually colored, depends on your situation. Maroon and deep purples are not colors that actually naturally occur in nature. If you're lucky enough to have something sizable like a purple tarp, you may want to make sure that's out somewhere where it's visible, because it's definitely a signal that this is not naturally something occurring naturally, but it's a man-made. Obviously, if you're going to signal help, you want to put it where somebody can see help. Angles, nice sharp angles because they don't occur in nature. Another thing you want to do with angles is use the use triangular shapes. Put things in basically a triangular shape because again, that's not something that's easily naturally occurring. It's recognizable as a man-made shape. Make sure it's big enough and make sure it's something that's attractive enough that somebody can see it. Again, it depends on what your situation is that you have to work with. Again, we've talked about signaling. Clothing is important. We already said that about clothing. That's something that you want to have ahead of time. Make sure you have the appropriate clothing for wherever it is that you are going to go or where you might be in the outdoors if you had to stay there for a certain amount of time. Definitely want to make a fire if you're going to be there for any length of time. If we have to, if you're going to be there for a length of time, conserve your food. You can survive a fairly long amount of time without food. However, lack of food can impair your functionality. So one of the ways you can deal with the fact that you have a limited amount of food if you were stuck and waiting for a longer period of time for somebody to come is that you can minimize the amount of movement you make, minimize your effort, don't move unnecessarily. CAP survival kits should have a survival guide or manual in them, which might help you with the actions and with actions with gathering stuff and building a shelter, that sort of stuff. We already mentioned the survival kit, and as I mentioned, it's a good idea to carry a survival kit, kit or vest of your own if you have one. Planning ahead of time can make a big difference if you were in an emergency situation. Planning for the possibility, and again, remember, it's your attitude that's going to have the hugest impact on how well you do. Okay, urgent care, we'll kind of bring this up. Basically, you're going to do, in the case of a forced landing, it's quite likely that somebody's going to suffer some sort of injury. It may not be life-threatening. It may not be any injury. It may not be nothing more than a bent finger, or it could be something more severe like a broken limb or some bleeding or that. You want to be able to treat people's injuries. However, you're not doctors. We're going to treat people's injuries to the extent that we are able to and equipped to. That's why I mentioned having a first aid CPR class is really a good thing to do. Again, not just because of CAP, but if you're in an unexpected situation where somebody suffers some sort of injury, if you understand enough about first aid, CPR, you may be able to provide enough care for them to make a significant difference. One of the things you don't want to do is move somebody if it's not absolutely necessary. But if you may have to, depending upon the situation. But in generally, you want to avoid moving somebody who's injured as much as possible. You want to make sure that they airway is open. Most modern first aid courses now and CPR courses move away from mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. They will indicate that you would want to sweep the person's mouth and try to pull them on their side to clear their airway. But that will depend on the course you take. You want to check for a pulse, give CPR as required, locate and control severe bleeding. Basically, the two means you want to do to control bleeding. First is pressure. Put a bandage on the wound and apply pressure to it. If it's too severe for pressure to work, the other is to apply a tourniquet. The old adage or the old rule of thumb was that tourniquets were bad. You put a tourniquet on somebody and they're going to lose the limb, whatever it is. That's no longer considered to be the case, and most modern first aid classes now will tell you to use tourniquets and how to use tourniquets to stop bleeding. So again, we want to avoid moving somebody. If somebody's injured, you don't want them moving around. You don't want them getting up and walking around. Keep them warm as needed to prevent shock. Know your own personal limits. Don't try to do something to somebody that's outside of what you can safely do. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the Good Samaritan law. As was mentioned earlier, the Good Samaritan law is present in most states and jurisdictions have some sort of Good Samaritan law that says if you try to help somebody, and as long as you're acting within the limits of your skills and knowledge, you can't be held liable for what happens to that person. So if you have take a first aid course and you apply a tourniquet to somebody or a bandage to somebody to stop bleeding, that would be within the limits of your skills and knowledge, and you would not be liable for that action. If you decided that you're going to do an emergency tracheotomy on somebody with a ballpoint pen and you aren't a surgeon who's already trained in that method, then that you would likely not be protected by Good Samaritan law. Finally, we're at the end of the road here with bloodborne pathogens. And the basic rule with bloodborne pathogens is if it's red and it's not yours, don't touch it. You want to avoid coming in direct contact with your skin with other people's blood or blood-based fluids, such as their saliva and the like. If you're going to help somebody who's bleeding, wear gloves. If you have a personal survival kit, you should have some latex or vinyl gloves in it, depending upon your allergy condition. The CAP survival kits will have gloves, but in general, you don't want to directly handle blood from somebody. If you do, wash yourself as soon as possible is what you want to do. And that ends our presentation for tonight. I'm going to stop presenting. And if anybody does have questions, we'll follow up on whatever questions people may have raised.
I didn't really see anything in the chat, so if anybody has anything, please ask. I don't want to get out of here for the night, but
yeah, I know we ran a little bit over. One thing is, as I mentioned, I kind of went through some of the material maybe a little bit quickly, and this material is in conjunction with the scanner reference manual. In addition to listening to our presentations and the slides, everybody should be reading the scanner manual that coincides every week. You should be reading those chapters of the scanner manual that our presentations coincide with. That's all I have.
Okay, I think that's it on our end. Next week, same time on Wednesday, we've got chapter 4, which is communications, and chapter 5, which is
Scanning
scanning
techniques.
patterns. So, as Lieutenant Citadino said, let's get the reading in, download your manuals, backtrack on the stuff we talked about tonight, take some time and look at the regulations. And I think that's it. Colonel 30acre, I guess we need to coordinate how best to get everyone's contact information.
Steve, also, you had a slide you wanted to show with our contact information?
Oh,
that you
yep,
wanted
I'm
to
sorry.
put?
Yep, bringing it up now.
While he's putting that up, I'm going to quick little spiel here. Thank everybody for coming out. For those of you that are out of wing, appreciate you guys being on tonight. I think my count was 12 separate wings, which is very good. So this Friday, we're going to have the mission staff assistant course. You guys are welcome to attend that as well. And then starting next week, Monday is ground team, Wednesday the scanner again, and then Friday the 3rd, we're starting mission radio operator. So everybody's welcome to attend those courses as well. So